Thank you for that intro, Saba. Thank you all for making me welcome. I very much appreciate it, and this is the kind of thing I really enjoy doing. I write, as you've heard, science fiction and fantasy. I am from the Caribbean, born in Jamaica, lived in Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, a little bit in the US before moving to Canada, living there for 35 years, and have now been back in the US for 8. So this book, Sister Mine, came out in 2013. It is set in Toronto. It is set within Black communities in Toronto. And that sometimes confuses people. But there is very much a large and vibrant Black community from all over the world in Toronto, Canada. And I'm going to start with backstory, which usually I wouldn't do or advise doing because backstory kind of keeps you distant from the characters. But my protagonist, Makeda, is... her story is so complicated that I figure I'd better introduce it. And then if we have time, you might hear some plot from Makeda herself. But this is her talking about what, her origin story, let's say. And if you're not used to science fiction or fantasy, I am almost never speaking in metaphor. If I say they flew, they flew. Like two pigeons in one nest, folded in each other's wings, they lay down in their curtained bed, like two blossoms on one stem. We'd had to be cut free of our mother's womb. She'd never been able to push the two-headed sport that was me and Abby out the usual way. Mom was still human at the time. My dad's family hadn't yet exiled her to the waters. After the C-section, just for a few days, she was kind of sidelined while she recovered. That gave Dad's family the opening they needed to move in and take over. Because from their perspective, things were a mess. Abby and I were fused, you see, conjoined twins. Abby's head, torso, and left arm protruded from my chest. We shared a liver and 3 3/4 legs between us. We had 2 stomachs, 2 hearts, and 4 lungs, and enough colon for us each to have a viable section, come to that. Abby and I could have lived as we were, conjoined. Between us, we had what we needed. But here's the real kicker. Abby had the magic, and I didn't. Far as the family was concerned, Abby was one of them, though cursed as I was, with the tragic flaw of mortality. Abby and me, my mom brought us that gift. You might say that my dad married outside the family. To hear some of them tell it, outside the species. Most of his family would barely give Mom the time of day while she was still around, despite the fact that she and her kin had done steward service to them for centuries, or rather, because of it. Dad's family could have stood it if she were just some dalliance of dads, a bit of booty call. Even love might have been okay if they'd kept it to a dull roar. Wouldn't have been the first time that a celestial had knocked boots with the help. But no, Dad and the help had to go and breed. With Mom unable to interfere for the time being, Dad's family decided that obviously the human doctors of this hospital where we were born had to surgically separate Abby and me. They put pressure on my dad till he agreed to it. They're not really venal, that lot, just too big for their britches. They've been emissaries of the big boss for so long that they forget they aren't gods themselves, just glorified overseers. But overseers with serious power. Mom's kin didn't say boo. They knew damn well they didn't have the cash to buy that much trouble. The second we were separated, Abby began to die. There was something vital she needed that my body had been supplying. No one could tell exactly what, but we were losing her. There's a guardian that attends births and deaths. He keeps his eye on the young and on the old, the former having so recently left the other world for this one, and the latter soon to depart that way again. That guardian, you might say he's a border guard. It's his job to send the living on their way and the dead on theirs. If it's not your time, you're not going anywhere. He was there, ready to do his job, when Abby and I were born, the semi-celestial child and her human donkey of a sister. Now it was time for him to escort her back across the barrier between the quick and the dead. He lingered over our cribs in intensive care for an instant. He smiled at us both, chucked us under our tiny chins. He thought we were kind of cute. Then he kissed us each on the forehead and gently picked Abby up, cradled her in his arms. My dad, grieving, watched him. The guardian gave him a rueful look. Have I mentioned that the guardian is our uncle, Dad's brother? He took Abby, leaving my dad to weep at my bedside. The guardian should have carried Abby to the crossroads right away. Instead, he took her to my mum's room. He'd taken a shine to Mum, Uncle had, a real shine, the kind that sets brother against brother, starts family feuds. Mum was still dopey from the anesthetic, but Uncle took care of that. Plain old unconsciousness was no challenge for the being who shuttled humans from life to death like beads in an abacus. Even in her half-sleep, she'd been begging to see her babies, and now she was fully awake. This was her first time seeing Abby, but when she clapped eyes on my uncle carrying a gasping bundle whose little mouth pursed like my dad's, she figured out pretty quickly that the baby was one of hers. The guardian's impartial. He has to be. Normally, he wouldn't be put in the position of herding family across the borders between life and death, since the rest of that lot don't die, not permanently anyway. Mum begged him for Abby's life. He replied, "There isn't enough of her to survive on this side of the gate." Mum was having none of it. She began to make promises. But what does a human have to offer a demigod? She tried to swear her lifelong obedience. Uncle shook his head. In a way, he already had that from every mortal on this plane and the next. But he didn't leave with Abby. Mum's arms ached to hold her baby. She promised sex the best he'd had, and he's had some good stuff. He's not just Lord of the Grave, my uncle. All that born-in and dying business has given him a taste for some of the sweetest gifts of the flesh. My mum was fine, they tell me, all blackberry sweet juice, and she knew what to do with what she'd got. How do you think she managed to catch the eye of not just one celestial, but two? Thing is, Uncle, for all his lechery, is pretty professional about his job. He shook his head, turned towards the door, but Mum spied the tear twinkling in his eye, and she knew she'd underestimated him. Sure, he liked doing the nasty plenty well, but save her, Mum said wildly, and I'll love you. Uncle stopped, one hand on the door's crash bar, the other supporting Abby's 1 3/4 leg little rump. He knows lies, Uncle does. There's a propaganda machine that makes him out to be the prince of them, but that's some bullshit. Those are the same people that won't let their kids borrow fiction from the libraries. Stories aren't lies, people. Some of them are truer than any autobiography. But Uncle does know how lies taste, refined sugar sweet, not molasses sweet like truth with its sulfurous backbite. Mum was telling the truth. The room was treacly with it. If he saved her daughter, she would love him. She would love death itself, fiercely and hotly. What parent wouldn't, under the circumstances? Uncle looked down at the child he was holding, at her piecemeal body and oddly canted face, her jaundiced skin going blue. She had my mum's eyes. We both do. Uncle turned. Mum reached her hand out, took his in it, her eyes brimming with hope, with love enough to fight for her child and more. Uncle whispered, "I can't do it. She needs organs, tissues that I can't give her. I'm a ferryman. I can't make her live." "Oh, you need me for that," said my dad. He walked into Mum's room. Uncle tried to snatch his hand away from Mum's, but she held on and looked Dad full in the face. A mother's love is fierce with pride, and Mum was never one for regrets. Dad read the signs of what had gone on between them, like spoor in the room. "You want this?" he asked Mum. "Yes." "Brother mine," said Dad, "give me my child." His 2 eyes made 4 with Uncle's. In that moment, Dad's eyes in his bark-brown face were green, the bright green of new spring leaves. Gently, Uncle handed Abby over. Gently, Dad took her. His first time holding his baby. That was the moment that Uncle violated the border between this side and the next, for once he had taken a soul unto himself, he wasn't ever supposed to hand it over until he had delivered it to its destination. If Uncle is a ferryman between the worlds, Dad is a gardener. His talents are growing, grafting, and pruning. "Let me go then, na," said Dad to his brother. "What?" said Mum. "Where are you taking her?" Dad replied, his voice full of loss. "Can't fix her up here. We have to go to the next side. You stay and see to Makeda." That's her sister, the one who's telling us the story. He tried on a smile. We're going to bring her sister back to you before you could say Jack Mandora. Uncle embraced Dad. Their circled arms protected Abby. Mum had to look away from the brothers then. Their aspects were already changing, preparing to cross over to the other side. Mortals cannot look upon that celestial shift for long. It's like looking directly into the sun. Between the glory that was the brothers, dying Abby was a fleeting scrap of dull flesh. Then the three were gone. Mum clambered back into her bed, closed her eyes, and prayed for both her children. No point imploring the big boss. He has more important things to look after. As so many clay pickings do, Mum prayed to the celestials more directly involved in the affairs of this plane, in this case, to her lover and to her brother. So the two brothers break some laws they're not supposed to, and there are consequences. Baby Abby came back to us from the other side, a living being who could grow and thrive on her own. Of course, the family knew immediately what the brothers had done. Abby shouldn't have been alive. Those were some big-ass laws they broke. There were to be consequences. So, since Dad had been willing to do all that for a human, they made him into one. They stripped his God soul away from him, leaving him purely clay picking. You do realize that Dad and his family had been among the first humans of the world. When the big boss decided he wanted some managerial staff, they volunteered for the job. Dad would have to spend a whole human lifetime with only the tricksy pinch of mojo that clay pickings can sometimes muster if they chance upon exactly the right charms and potions and prayers in exactly the right configuration at exactly the right time. His God soul would return to him when the flesh body died. After all, Abby would need someone to look after her till she was grown, someone who wasn't too busy looking after every other living thing. Because Grandma Ocean had seen to Mum. Grandma's province is the waters of the world, salt and sweet both. She tossed Mum over her shoulder into one of them and didn't even look back to see which one she'd landed in. She didn't deprive my mother of life, but of the beautiful form with which, Grandma convinced herself, Mum had bewitched her sons. Loch Ness has Nessie, its monster of fame and fable. Okanagan Lake in in British Columbia, has Naitaka, also known as Ogopogo, a snake demon. As with them, no one has ever found proof that the monster that people began citing in Lake Ontario just under 30 years ago really exists. She does have a name, though, and it's Cora. I call her Mum, or I would if I ever met her. And Uncle Jack, or John, or whichever of his monikers he chose to use at any given time, well, his family couldn't do anything incapacitating to him as they had to Dad. If they did, it would bung up the clay-picking wheel of life and death. No one would be able to get on or off, and pretty soon the big boss would come looking for the cause of the constipation. And though he or she or they or it might or might not be green, they say he's a big fella, bigger than all creation, and you sure as hell wouldn't like him when he was angry. For his transgressions against the taboos of death and life, the family punished my uncle in the worst way they could think of. They left him unharmed. His curse was to carry the knowledge of the fate he had helped to bring down on his dear brother and on my mother. That's how the story went that Uncle used to tell me and Abby when we were kids and he was babysitting and had run out of other ways to keep us occupied. He made it sound almost jolly, at least romantic, because Uncle likes to keep things lighthearted. It's important to him to always have a smile on his face. It keeps his spirits up, and sometimes it prevents people from being too scared when it's their time and he shows up to ferry them over to the other side. Though sometimes his death's head grin just makes them shit their pants with terror. But, as Uncle says, you win some, you lose some. How am I doing for time? Okay, perfect. So that's how Abby and Makeda came to be, and they are now living in Toronto, as I said. Makeda always aware that she has no magic and the rest of the family does, and she's always felt a little bit. She's always felt a way about that. So she's lived with Abby all her life, and the story opens when she decides to try to move out and live on her own. She's an adult, She finds a place that is a rundown warehouse space in Toronto that might or might not be something like somewhere I once lived. She goes, there's a band living there and they practice there, and she goes to one of their gigs, and stuff happens. And she wakes up walking along the shore of Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario is one of the Great Lakes. She might as well have been walking at the shore of an ocean. And the part of the beach that she's on was actually created by the city of Toronto from landfill. I used to imagine Ma hunting this lake, swirling slinkily through the cold, deep water and surfacing to gobble up the cranky geese. Abby and I loved roasted goose. Dreamily, I searched the beach. Waterfront dump sites made for lots of drift glass, beautifully weathered smooth into gleaming jewels. When we were little, Uncle had told us stories about Mum, about how she used to love beach combing, how she especially adored the scarcest colors of beach glass, cobalt and red and orange. Uncle would give me and Abby small whorled shells, tell us that if we put them to our ears and listened carefully, we could hear our mother talking to us. Abby used to hear Mum's voice in the shells, she told me, said Mum sang to her. I only heard a faint whooshing sound, except for one time when a mom shell had clearly whispered, "Eat your peas." That had been the first and last time, though. I'd been about 9, never did start eating my peas. I mean, it wasn't like she could make me. I put one of the shells to my ear, only the usual slushing sound. Maybe it was more than that. Yeah, right, maybe I could understand what trees were saying like my sister could. On the bike path above, a motorbike slowly puttered by, idling so low I couldn't hear the engine. Its rider was a comfortably fat black guy, big fro restrained by a bright orange bandana, cheerful face. He looked like he'd be good to hug, share a doobie with, and just shoot the breeze with about life, the universe, and everything. He'd taken his T-shirt off and tucked its hem into the back waistband of his shorts. Smart. It was a hot day for spring. I'd been longing to do the same thing. I'd been wondering whether the occasional hiker or dump truck driver would be taken aback at the sight of a woman topless but for a heavy-duty sports bra. The Leslie Street Spit felt like the type of place where the social rules could be relaxed a bit. An ozone effervescence to the air tickled at my nose. I looked up at the sky. I was right at the shore of the expanse of the eerie inland ocean that is Lake Ontario. No way to miss the determined little thundercloud trundling my way, literally out of a clear blue sky. Gray-bottomed, it was waddling towards me like a grimy toddler with a full diaper. A fat, wet drop landed on the back of my neck. The thundercloud was about to drop its load, and soon. It looked as though it only held enough water for a short burst, but spring storms were chilly. Wouldn't be great to be caught out in one for long. The oncoming squall started herding wavelets ahead of itself to the shore. They batted, cat-like, at my boots. I said to the thundercloud, "Could you give me just a sec, please?" It was probably a natural storm, but politeness never hurt. Could be Aunt Kathy up there, nudging that storm cloud along. Whatever the reason, the cloud advanced no further, while I took my cell phone out of my pocket and dumped it into my knapsack. If there was going to be rain, it'd keep drier there. There was a spectacular lightning flash. "Okay," I said, "I'm done now." It was time to rejoin the world anyway. I hauled my knapsack onto my shoulders and climbed up to the bike path. I set off back through the trees towards the main road that led out to the spit. I'd barely registered the rustling in the high undergrowth when a large pair of clutching hands grabbed my leg. I screamed. Terror lent me the strength to wrench my jeans-covered calf out of the handhold. I felt the scrape of claws slicing through the fabric of my jeans as I pulled away. My haint was upon me. Its small, heavy body scrambled, quarreling up my side. Hideously contorted baby face, brown as my own, its hair an angry, knotted snarl of black. Now it had those large hands at my throat. It punched small knob carries of knees against my rib cage, all but knocking the breath out of me. I staggered, managed not to fall. One of the haint's searching thumbs pushed brutally past my teeth into my mouth. It tasted of dirt and of nastily salt skin. The skin was looser than skin on thumbs should be. I gagged. I bit down hard. The haint's snarling became a whip-dog yelp. More by luck than aim, I got my hands around its ankles. I tore it off me and swung it around full weight to crack it with a dull thud against the bole of a tree I hadn't even seen there. The haint crumpled to the ground, its eyes closed, its spine oddly bent in the middle. Then it was up again, though its upper body hung wrongly to one side. It glared at me. Today my haint was wearing the form of a child, just old enough to walk on its chubby legs. Its hair framed its anger-contorted cherub's face. All right. I chanced to look behind me. There was dense, chest-high undergrowth barring my way to the paved entrance to the spit where there might be people. The place was usually pretty deserted. I took off, running pell-mell away from the haint along the narrow footpath. Would the haint recover enough to follow me? Fuck, Daddy! My brain screamed, regressed with terror, but Daddy couldn't help me now. I took a sharp left over a low patch of scrub grass. Mom? Was that the thump of little feet behind me or the thud of my own heart? I threw a terrified glance over my shoulder. I know how many times had Abby told me not to look back at a pursuer, not that she knew bugger all about running. But she was right. You only lost more time looking over your shoulder, psyched yourself out and did stupid things such as tripping over your own feet, which is exactly what I did for the second time that day. I tumbled ass over tea kettle into the undergrowth. All the rolling made my head spin. I came to a stop with my cheek lying on a thistle. I hissed, jerked my head up off the ground, off the thorns. I was in a thistle patch that had grown so high and thick it covered me completely. The prickles jabbed into my wrists and against my face where there was exposed flesh. My thick clothing protected me from the rest, but I didn't dare move from my hiding place. I twisted my head away from a thistle that was scraping too close to my eye and peered through the plants. My haint was tracking through the tall undergrowth a few feet away. It no longer seemed injured. We'd never been able to hurt it badly enough to stop it, though gods knew we tried. Looked like it hadn't seen me. It had softened its appearance, trying to look more like a toddler. It was wearing rugged little baby jeans, turned up at the cuffs in the cutest way. A pair of sweet kitty runners on its feet, white, trimmed with aqua and pink. They were the kind with a red light in their heels that flashed every time the creature took a step wrong. It always got one thing wrong, though, almost like it couldn't help revealing itself. This time it was its hands. They were the size of a grown man's, not a small man either. All right, I'm going to stop there. I guess now is when you get to ask questions, throw fruit, complain, stuff like that. Thank you. Someone behind you with a plant. Ghost. Yeah, she's calling it a ghost. She has no idea what it is. It looks like a toddler, except for the hands. And but a few paragraphs later, it starts eating the plants whole. So not so much a toddler. They do that bit by bit.
How do you spell?
I'm not sure I got it right because it's an American word and I'm not. I spelled it Haint, but I've seen it spelled HA''Nt. And since I'm writing about haints again in the comic, I need to go look that up and make sure I'm using the right version.
You said it's an American word?
Yeah.
A North American word?
No, specifically a Black American word. Yeah.
How did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Wow, that's a long while back. My dad was a writer, so at first I didn't know because that's what daddies did. So I didn't much think about it. I was a reader. And if I recall, I think I was about 16, living in Guyana. At the time, it was hard to get any new books there. But I was living with my aunt, and a friend of hers lent me some of his books, and he was reading science fiction. At that time, I didn't know very many people who did. And one of the books was a collection of short stories from the Clarion Science Fiction Workshop, which I'd never heard of at that point. And that's when it occurred to me that people could teach you how to do it. And I think that's when I sort of started hatching the idea. Eventually, I did end up attending Clarion myself in 1995 which would have made me 34 years old, but I finally got there.
I love the way your mind works. I can't get in there. It makes mine feel very bland.
Probably not.
And it's almost like a child's fabrication, with just a grain of truth to it in there.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
It's good to hear that. Thank you. Yes.
I recently came across an interview that you did, maybe a little more than a minute and a half long. Talk about your learning disability and how you can write a novel but not do the math project.
Oh, God, no.
I wanted to thank you for sharing that information because you gave me some insight on my family. I have a 13-year-old son who has autism. My wife has a learning disability. My 3 daughters also. And they can process information in my son's brilliant mind. He didn't think about World War II, but he couldn't do a math project.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about that a little bit and how that kind of has shaped the world?
Yes, I was not diagnosed until I was probably in my 40s. So up until then, I just thought I was sick, mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Turns out I'm not sick. So I have nonverbal learning disorder, which is a kissing cousin to high-functioning autism. I have adult attention deficit disorder. How I can write a novel, I have no idea. I think I go sentence by sentence. I have those 2 as learning disorders, and then I have chronic health conditions. I have fibromyalgia, which means I hurt all over a lot of the time. Finding that out changed my life because it meant this was just how my brain worked. It wasn't something that was wrong with me per se. And the definition of a learning disorder is that cognitively you're high functioning in one set of tasks and low or middle functioning in the others. So I could stand here with nothing around me and not move and turn this into a morass of disorganized papers, lose everything I own in about 5 minutes. It does affect things like getting from the front door of my apartment to the bedroom because it's a mess. People don't really understand just how messy it can get. I take medication that helps the ADD, but there's no medication for the nonverbal learning disorder. I eventually stopped seeing them as illnesses because there are advantages to both. People with ADD tend to be very, very, very smart. And I think I am, except for, that math thing. And nonverbal learning disorder means high verbal ability. So I now try to work the way my brain works. I don't try to work the way sort of a more normative brain is supposed to work. So I'm better at saying things like, no, that's got to do with dates. If you want me to sort of say I'm coming here on a particular date, I still have no idea what date it is. As Vicky will tell you, trying to get me organized to get here was a job of work. But it's helped a lot to be able to say, this is how my brain works, this is how I need you to give me this information. And it helps a lot to be able to say it to other people who might be struggling with similar things, whether or not there's a diagnosis, to realize that brains are individual, they work the way they work. You can learn ways around the things that are challenging, but you don't have to, your brain does not have to be a carbon copy of the next person's.
Did you ever see those disabilities as limitations for you at a point in time?
Sure. When I can't find any damn thing in the house and I don't remember where I put the flour. I lost a chicken once. And it was a dead chicken, so it didn't stay lost for very long, but it was not pleasant. So yeah, very much limitations. But, having a body is a limitation. So I try to see the good things about them. There's things I know I can. I tell my students I will not remember your name or your face. I can't recognize you. I won't remember your name. I once mixed up the only 2 young Chinese men in my class out loud twice in the course of a 3-hour class. I had to say, I can't even front and pretend that didn't happen. That just happened. But if I tell you that a comma goes in this sentence and you don't put one there, I will remember. So I try to work with what works and, do what I can, get help for what doesn't.
Do you get writer's block? And if you do, like, how do you deal with it?
I'm not sure I get writer's block. I sure find it hard to write because it's, to this kind of brain, it's like doing the same thing I did yesterday, or in my case, 3 weeks ago. And so I get stuck that way. I've discovered that when I'm reluctant to tackle something, it's because at some level I think I can't write it. I think I don't have what it takes to write it. But I've learned that writing is rewriting. The first thing you put down, chances are, is not going to be the most brilliant. It's kind of like a place marker. And as you work that over and over again, it gets better. You can fix something you've written. You can't fix something you haven't written. So if I tell my brain, look, you're smart, just go with it. And also remember that no work of art is perfect. They just don't exist. What you create is going to be always not as strong as what's in your head, but it might still be brilliant. So I go ahead and do it anyway. As to the reluctance to keep doing the same thing over and over, I've noticed there's one way I can use the distractibility in my favor. If I just open the file, I'll be writing in about 5 minutes. I'll forget the last thing I was doing. It might have been walking down the street, but I'll forget. So, so open the file is one way, and the other is stop giving yourself such a hard time. What'll sometimes happen is that the helping brain that doesn't have words so much is trying to tell me that I've taken a plot down a road that isn't working. So then I go for a walk, or I do the dishes, something where I don't need to think much, and the creative brain goes walkabout, and often as not, it'll solve the problem for me. So trying not to be afraid of it, it's actually trying to help you. It never ever means don't write.
How do you cope with the reader to writer switch and get over the fear of writing? Because actually starting is hard, and trying to manipulate the storm that is world building is very difficult. And yours is very distinctive. It's very nice.
Thank you. So let me try and rephrase that question. Say it again, because I heard 3 ideas and I'm kind of lost.
Sorry, my brain's rattled. But how do you cope with the reader to writer switch to start writing and get over the fear of writing and actually world build?
Okay. I don't exactly switch. I'm kind of 3 people when I'm writing. So one is the reader reading the text for the first time. That person I need to not listen to too much because they'll get in my way. One is the writer figuring out what words to put down. And the other is the editor, who I really need to not listen to because she'll really get in my way. And when everything is humming along, all 3 of those are happening simultaneously. But sometimes I do need to kind of think of it as hats and say, all right, the reader hat's going over here right now, the editor hat's going over here, and give myself permission to suck and just play with it. I mean, if you remember being a kid, I was once down, it wasn't Lake Ontario, I think it was Lake Erie, and on the beach was a little boy with a spade and a lot of sand, digging and pretending he was a superhero. And he was making up a song about it as he went. And no blocks, that child it was the best song ever. And he didn't care who was listening, he was just doing his thing. I tried to get to that part, because that's what gets text down, and then you can fix the text after.
Have you always been as original as you are right now? Because I noticed that whenever you speak, it's just straight from your head. It's almost, it's probably filtered, but it's not super filtered.
Yeah.
However, I feel like as a student, you can't really be that person.
We kind of like it when you are. As a professor, makes class way more interesting. Speaking, some professors probably don't, but I do. This is training. So I've been doing this kind of speaking engagement at least 20 years now. There is more filtering than there used to be because medication, thank heaven. because I have said some stuff. The words are out, you think, ooh, no. It's practice. It's having a facility with words, which is learned through reading, which is learned through writing. I was lucky enough to be surrounded by words and people who were working with them. But you don't have to be. I mean, you're in school, you already are surrounded by people who are working with words. Yeah, practice and realizing when you're up here, nothing happens without you. So you're in control. You can do whatever. If I make you saw I made a bunch of mistakes while I was reading. I just stopped and went back a word and kept going. So again, it comes down to cutting yourself some slack, and letting the creative part out.
There's a question.
Yeah, there was. All right.
How does writing comics differ from writing novels? Can you tell us anything about the Sandman universe?
Yeah, I can. And let me not forget, there was another person that I'm going to get back to. Comics, when I was invited to pitch for the new Sandman universe and they accepted my pitch, they kept saying graphic novel, so I thought graphic novel. Only to come, they meant comic, which means that every month I have to have 22 pages written. That's the big difference, is doing the same thing over and over again with that shorter periodicity is really, really hard for me. Yeah. The other is I'm used to inferring things in text a lot, and the reader sort of has to guess. It doesn't happen with comics. If it's not there on the page, the editors are going to come back to you. I've learned, therefore, that captions are my friend. That I can info dump in captions till the cows come home, it doesn't matter. And I can't write dialogue that nobody declaims for pages in a comic. You get one exchange and then you're on to a new panel. The Sandman thing came about when I heard from one of the editors of Vertigo saying that it was a big, big secret, they were going to be rebooting the Sandman. Neil had created a new house in the Dreaming. Did I want to pitch? And who was going to say no to that? So I said yes. They said they were going to tell me like right away, and it was 2 years. But it eventually did happen. So now I'm learning to write comics in one of the more well-known comic, vehicles there is. It's a little daunting, but every time I get scared, I think I'm writing a Sandman comic. How freaking cool is that? And I get back at it. Was that you that had your hand up? All right.
To follow up that question, if you can give yourself a superpower as
Not flying, because that makes me hurl. It would be the power to wake up every morning and change the way I look completely. I don't mean necessarily always human either. So if I decide I want to be 6 foot tall and have a blue nose, I could do that like that. That'd be the superpower. What would my name be? It would be Nalo. You can't see the tattoo I have, but it's a Adinkra symbol from the Akan people. And it's called Nchin, which means changing oneself always. It's just the way I'm wired, I think. I like things changeable.
I was going to say that. I don't think I've ever seen a picture of you the same. That your hairstyle's always different. So I think you kind of already do that.
Yeah, the 6 foot thing is taking longer, but I do try, yes.
All right, let's thank Nalo.